good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be in the world, and of course, whether you're watching live or on catch-up. Welcome to 2021, and welcome back to a new season of webinars from FIPP. Last year in our series of around 20 webinars, we covered a huge variety of topics, including innovation, digital subscriptions, e-commerce, and more. The coronavirus crisis, which meant that we had to suspend our portfolio of in-person events, led us to develop new skills as an organization in digital video and webinar broadcasting incredibly quickly. And that was an unintended benefit of the crisis that we all face, something that I'm sure you've all found in your own lives throughout the course of last year as well. And it is to the subject of the COVID-19 crisis that we turn once again today. Sitting as we are in January, in what seems like the worst days of the pandemic, I'm here to tell you that there is hope. An excellent piece of data journalism from Bloomberg is tracking the global rollout of the new suite of vaccines that have been developed to combat coronavirus. And while the numbers around that rollout are currently quite small, it is clearly poised to explode in the weeks and months to come. And of course, with this comes the light at the end of the tunnel, the prospect that we might be able to return to something approaching our pre-COVID lives before the end of this year. And the right thing to do now, therefore, is to start to turn our attention to what that post-COVID world might look like. And that is the subject of today's webinar. We've titled it, What Smart Companies Are Doing to Prepare for the Rebound. And we hope to give you a flavor of the key areas for you and your businesses to start considering as the prospect of a recovery from these dark times begins to look like a real and imminent possibility. The first webinar of the year also marks the start of new beginnings, and I'm delighted to welcome two new partners to FIPP, our hosts for today's webinar. More on them in a minute. This session marks the start of a new collaboration between us, and I'm delighted to welcome both Jim and John to the FIPP fold. But before I introduce them and before we get started, a few quick items of housekeeping. As ever, regular viewers will know that we're very keen for this session to be as interactive as possible. And with this in mind, please do have a look at the webinar controls that you can find at the bottom of your screen. There you'll see the Q&A button. Please use this to submit questions to myself, to Jim, and to John, and to a couple of the contributors who are on the call today as well. We'll be keeping an eye on this throughout the session and answering your questions as we go along. You can also upvote other delegates' questions so that you can get those answered quicker. There's also a chat button, as I mentioned earlier, which you can use to talk to us and to each other, but do also keep an eye on the chat window for useful links that we will be posting throughout today's session. This webinar is being recorded, and you'll be able to watch the recording next week on our YouTube channel, and you'll be able to see some snippets as well on our social media channels. You can find our YouTube channel at /FIPP World. A reminder also that if you haven't already done so, please do sign up for the FIPP newsletter. A link to do this will be in the chat very soon. It's absolutely the best way to keep abreast of the latest happenings, both from FIPP and the broader industry. And a big thank you from all of us to those of you that have already signed up. A reminder also that in the next few weeks, all of FIPP's key content is going to be going behind a members-only access wall on our website. If you're not a member, you will need to sign up to continue to view our key content. You'll be able to do this either individually or corporately. Watch out for more details on that shortly. Of course, we will continue to run a series of webinars that are open to everybody as well. Right, I think that's enough from me. I think it's now time to get on with today's show. And I'd like to start by introducing our hosts for today's session, starting with j.elliott. Jim has been in the media business for 36 years, and it's no exaggeration to say that he is uniquely placed to give us an overview of the state of the market, both in the US and globally, as his company has generated more than $650 million for its clients since its inception. And joining Jim is John French, a well-known name in the industry, having been CEO of companies including Cygnus Business Media and Penton Media, as well as running Primedia's business magazines and much more. And together they work in partnership as French and Elliott. They've assembled a fantastic panel of experts for today's session. So Jim and John, welcome, and over to you.
Thank you, James. I appreciate the introduction. It's a privilege to be here. In fact, I want to introduce my friend and the one that introduced me to FIPP several years ago in Berlin, Reed Phillips. Reed is the president of Oaklands International, the leading mid-market global investment bank, ranked #1 worldwide by Merger Market for mid-market M&A transactions. Oaklands has 850 investment bankers in 45 countries. He has completed himself over 200 M&A transactions with big media and media-related companies, too many to mention here. I think and I believe he's well known to your audience, James. Anyway, now to Reed.
Thank you, Jim. I'm delighted to be with you. And I'm going to start by talking a little bit about what we've seen in the M&A market since COVID, really starting in March of 2020. At that time, we had 3 deals in the market that were going to close in the next couple of weeks. All 3 of those deals collapsed. And that's a very common story for investment bankers. And in the deal world, that's what you're going to hear, that the deals that were about to close pretty much all collapsed. That's because the buyers were very cautious at that time about going forward and buying a company at prices that they'd already agreed to. We found that some of the buyers were perhaps willing to buy at substantially lower prices, the same business that they were going to acquire at a much higher price, but they needed the comfort of removing a lot of the risk. And their lenders had the same concerns. The lenders were really backing off on M&A at that time. So a lot of those deals did collapse. Some were paused and maybe they returned later in the year when everybody felt more comfortable and had an idea of how things were going to shake out. But that was a very hard period for M&A. Things started to loosen up a little by June, and we were seeing some gradual improvement with deals getting done. And then by September, things, I think, improved quite a bit. We were seeing deals get done at strong multiples, and we were seeing folks hire investment bankers again to take their companies out for sale. The industries within media that performed fairly well through COVID were businesses focused on news, information, book publishing, digital, and subscriptions. The ones that did not perform well were advertising related and events. In fact, events, M&A and events has, really shut down entirely. A lot of those events have switched to virtual and are making a good go of it. But I think buyers will want to wait to see what the world looks like when it's a combination of face-to-face and virtual going forward sometime in 2021. And looking ahead to 2021, the industries I mentioned that had performed well through COVID, those industries are still going to be doing a lot in M&A and are going to be very active. That includes subscription businesses, information companies, and book publishing. On the subscription side, we sold a subscription business, a digital company, E&E News, 100% digital subscriptions to Politico. That deal just closed about a week ago, strong multiples on that. And as everybody, I think, is aware, Simon & Schuster, the book publishing company, was sold. That was a frothy auction and sold at a relatively high multiple. So we're seeing businesses like that continue to, do well and sell at high multiples. We're really not seeing transactions involving ad-driven businesses and events businesses. And if there are transactions, they're being done at very low prices, again, because buyers can't quite get comfortable with what they're buying and how well those businesses might perform in the future. On the bright side, In 2021 and towards the end of 2020, we did start to see new buyers emerging for media. We were selling several divisions of Bonnier, a magazine business based in New York. We sold one of the divisions to a digital media company, and we sold the second division to a fintech company, Octane, who they were interested in acquiring the content library that had been produced by Bonnier in the motorcycle space. And Octane does lending to buyers of motorcycles. So they liked the fact that they could capture the audience that Bonnier had along with the content. And then I think a lot of you probably just heard that Travel and Leisure magazine was, the brand was sold by Meredith. They're retaining the magazine, but the brand was sold for $100 million to a company in the travel space. They're going to use that name, Travel and Leisure, as the company name. And again, they were looking for access to the large audience that Travel and Leisure has and the content. So that's a new development. Buyers that are kind of unexpected coming in and buying these media companies with content. And then secondly, I would say that the thing that you're going to see in M&A in 2021 is buyers and sellers trying to grapple with what the effect of COVID was on the financials in terms of what they're buying. So some companies had a nice COVID bump in 2020. Book publishing is a good example. We're in the market with some companies, and we're actually having to normalize the results for what the company might have looked like if COVID hadn't happened, because they were selling many more books than they've ever sold before historically. So that's on the bright side, but it still becomes an issue in M&A because buyers simply want to buy a business based on how it's going to perform in the future. As the vaccine kicks in and things change, with COVID, you're going to start to see normalized levels again, and buyers are going to want to price their businesses, the businesses they're buying, off of those levels. Absolutely, it is true. I think private equity, like every other buyer group, kind of backed off for a while in 2020. I had early conversations with a number of private equity firms in, say, March and April. They said at the time, we would not be comfortable buying a business with only having Zoom management meetings and not meeting the team face to face and in person. So I think that's, again, part of the reason things slowed down so much. But we're starting to, see that the private equity buyers are also starting to rebound and come back. And we think, just as you asked in your question, there will be a lot of dry powder available for acquisitions, including in the media space.
Thank you again, or thank you so much, Reed. It appears that 2021 will be full of activity in the M&A space. Now, I'd like to introduce my good friend for many years, Mr. Magazine. Dr. Samir Husney is the founder of the Magazine Innovation Center at the University of Mississippi School of Journalism. He's also a distinguished and award-winning professor. He has put on the ACT experience for the media industry for 9 years and would have celebrated his 10th year had it not been for COVID last year. He's an author and regularly interviewed expert on magazines. In fact, last week, he was all over the press talking about the 60 new magazine launches in 2020. One of the interesting things and things I find fascinating about Dr. Husney is that he has a collection of over 30,000 first edition magazines, probably the largest collection in the US. Of course, we all are asking, where do you put 30,000 magazines? But now to you, Dr. Husney.
Well, thank you, Jim and John, for the question. It really has been a surprising response from all the folks that I have interviewed, because if you want to sum it in one sentence, is stay the course, which pandemic or no pandemic, magazine people are so used to change, and change is part of the everyday life of what they do. So where a lot of folks may have been like stunned by the speed of the change that was needed, most of the magazine publishers were able to adapt faster than they even expected themselves. And so staying the course does not necessarily mean not changing or doing anything different. Staying the course in this case means that keep the content that you've been delivering over the years the same to an audience who has this habit of consuming your content, because they get used to it, they get to trust it, they become like more like the friend coming to their home. And it was also the content that they used for a distraction. They wanted something away from all the bad news coming from the television screens, coming from the newspapers, coming from social media. So it was sort of like this me moment when the magazine arrived at the audience, that the audience felt so good about it, and had this relationship with this positive impact that will enhance their life, that will give them a smile on their face, and will evoke some emotions in their life. That's why we did not see a lot of changes in the content of the magazines or what the magazines were offering through the years. The major change that we are witnessing, based on my interviews with all these CEOs and presidents of magazine companies, is the change in the business model. That the biggest impact was in advertising. That's where we've seen a big slip in the advertising revenue. That is a major component of the revenue of the major magazine companies. However, they are making up to that by seeing an increase in subscriptions. People are ordering more magazines, using the digital devices to order the ink on paper subscriptions. And in some companies, that increase is up to like 25 and 30% subscriptions, higher cover prices. I mean, the business model is, although it's in infancy, it's changing as we speak. The Meredith, for example, launched 5 new magazines last year with a frequency. The average cover price of those magazines was $7.99 an issue and $20 for the subscriptions for 4 issues. This is a far cry from selling a magazine for $2.99 and $3.99 and charging $5 or $10 for a whole year subscription. So we are starting to see that the major magazine media companies and those who are really going on the right track are changing from being in the business of selling the audience to an advertiser to be in the business of selling content to an audience, which is a major, major change that's taking place. That's going to help us as we move forward to be in the business of selling the content and in the business of putting the audience first as a major source of revenue. The audience still wants that positive engagement, positive relationship with that magazine. And we are seeing that in a major way, is that magazine editors are now freer to do whatever they want to do with the magazine and their covers, because magazine is no longer just an impulse buy where people go and buy it for $1 or $2. And if they don't like what's on the cover, they don't buy it. Magazines are now like $7.99, $8.99. So it's even freed the editors from the restrictions of diversity, inclusion, equality, you name it. And that's why in the last 6 months alone, I have been able to buy and collect more than 336 magazines with Black subjects on their covers. Something that is what maybe 5-10 times more than what we've seen in the last 100 years. And some of the explanations I'm getting from some of those editors who are willing to talk about it is that because a different class of people are buying the magazines because the magazines now cost a lot of money, and they are not just an impulse buy, they are rather more of a habitual buy, and people are back into the business of buying and selling content.
Thank you, Samir. What's interesting there is a couple of points. One is the mention of 60 new magazine launches last year. And you talk about staying the course. There are people who want to get into this business and more than staying the course, actually investing and launching. That's pretty fascinating. The other one is the freedom that content providers now feel that they have as a result of the environment of the last year or so, which is obviously a very positive thing coming out. The whole idea of staying the course is something I'm going to be addressing later on once we get through with our guest. We'll come back to that as far as management, and especially management in the media industry. So coming up next is Tom Kemp, who's the chairman and president of NORTHSTAR Media. And as you know, well, you probably don't know, but Tom and I also have been friends for many, many years. We worked together at Penton many years ago. And we followed each other's career, and Tom's done very, very well. And Tom's company, NORTHSTAR Media, specializes in two areas. One, a lot of face-to-face events, and entirely all of their assets are in the travel industry. So yeah, you put that matrix together under COVID, where there are no face-to-face events and very little travel. So one of the reasons I asked Tom to come on, Jim and I, is because we just want to make everybody else feel a little bit better about their own portfolios, because Tom is definitely in the crosshairs between no shows and travel. And with that, we'd love to hear his observations of a little bit of 2020, but also what's happening in 2021. With that, Tom.
John and Jim, thank you very much for having me be part of your webinar and with a group of esteemed colleagues. NORTHSTAR Travel Media, first of all, 40% of our business pre-COVID was face-to-face events. We would put on 100 events in 13 different countries around the world. 100% of our business is focused on the travel and hospitality industry. I don't think there's been an industry that's been impacted globally and continues to be impacted more than the global travel and hospitality industry. So it has been a very challenging time for us since about middle of last March, and continues to be challenging. I think one of the things that we've learned about this is actually started back in 2009 when I joined as CEO of NORTHSTAR, coming out of the last recession, or being in the midst of the last recession. At that point in time, 70% of our revenues were print media advertising revenues. And so we started through a program to diversify our company and to make sure that we were multi-platform, looked for opportunities to generate revenues by bringing buyers and sellers together in as many ways as possible. Certainly, we continue to this day to produce print publications, but that's now our third largest segment. Our largest segment has been face-to-face events, followed by custom content solutions, digital media generally, about 35% of our business, but also subscription information business, including e-commerce subscriptions for providing software solutions to clients and customers, research. So we've been diversifying our revenue for a long time. So as we went into the COVID crisis, because of the diversification and being a multi-platform company in ways in which to communicate to all of our different segments in as many ways possible, our business actually held up relatively well. When I say relatively well, we were year on year, our revenue was down a bit less than 50%. which under normal circumstances would be a disaster. But when you think about, we haven't been able to run a face-to-face event since middle of last March. The fact that 100% of our business is travel and hospitality, and many of our clients, their business has been zero. I mean, the cruise industry, the river cruise companies, the tour operators that take people to Ireland and Italy and the Far East and China, global travel, the globalization of our business. So many of our clients, our industry is down anywhere from 80 to 100% from where they were pre-COVID. So the fact that we're down about 50% is clearly a benefit to us. What we did was, number one in the playbook, as you know, John, is when you're faced with a cataclysmic impact on your business, is to reduce your cost basis as rapidly as possible. And so we started in March of last year, and we went through our entire organization to look for every opportunity we could to reduce costs, including our largest cost, which is obviously people. However, instead of just doing layoffs, we did a combination of some RIFs, some reduction in force, permanent reduction in force, but more, we utilized a furlough format where we put people on a part-time with us, and everyone else took a salary reduction. That we took over 30% of our 35% of full annual costs out of the business from starting April 1 through the end of the year. And in addition to that, we quickly pivoted to find ways in which we could produce events in a digital online format. So virtual events, we went from converting face-to-face events that we previously had into virtual events. And then we went to produce new virtual events that never existed before. And in fact, from September 1 through December 31st, we produced 50 virtual events. The engagement was very high. The interaction, the quality of the content was great. The amount of traffic we produced, in many instances, much higher traffic than you would on a traditional face-to-face event. However, the revenue was a lot less. You're never going to, particularly for our events that rely a lot on registration revenue, and we have events where registrations could be $3,000 to $4,000 per person. You're never going to get that online. And even retaining your sponsors, even though you were providing them with good quality sales leads, we were able to do a pretty good job of that. But I'd say the conversion of revenue in a virtual event was anywhere from 10 to 30% of a face-to-face event. So that had a big impact. But we really pivoted very quickly, figured out how to put using the right formats, the right platforms. And we expect to see this as an important part of our portfolio going forward. As we got into the year, as we communicated, and our teams did a great job in keeping connections with our audiences, keeping connections with our sponsors. And one of the benefits of the virtual event is that no one could get together anywhere. Everyone was separated out. And this was an opportunity for people to get together, to reconnect, to be able to share stories and share information. And certainly a lot of what we did was to provide research and up-to-date information, what's going on in our industry. As we look at this year, in fact, it was just last Thursday that I announced, as we prepared for this year, we brought back everyone 100% from furlough and reinstated everyone's salaries 100%, as well as restocking our sales commission in our budgets, as well as our bonus plans. So as we enter this year, we have much more optimism. At least we know what we're dealing with as opposed to last year, and much more long-term optimism as a result of the impact of vaccines, particularly hopefully getting COVID under control, even though it's totally out of control at this point in time. But more stability in their market, talking with our clients all the time, their anticipation, what they're seeing in terms of forward bookings, certainly by the spring, summer, and fall next year. The cruise lines are getting back and will be getting back in the water. And from our standpoint, we're a leading indicator because they need to start spending money with us to rebuild their bookings for future business. So we're somewhat optimistic. expectations of face-to-face events. Everyone we talk to, I think everyone expects to see face-to-face events running again in the summer, and if not in the fall of this year. First half of the year, very light. So, the outlook is pretty encouraging. In fact, as of today, we have 25% of our full year's budget already on the books, which is, in this environment, in the uncertainty that we're all dealing with, as of January 11th, to have a quarter of your entire year's budget. And by the way, we budgeted for a significant increase of revenue year over year, by about $20 million over what we produced last year.
That's great. Thanks, Tom. As you could probably tell, Tom and his company has been through a kind of rough journey, no pun intended, in the travel industry, but he was very pleased to make that announcement to the employees to bring everyone back from furlough. That's a big milestone, and be able to do that so quickly in the beginning of 2021, we think that may be a good indicator of maybe how things go for the remainder of the year. As you can tell, with this format, we started with Reed talking about the large M&A market, and then we came down in a little bit to Samir talking about content, and mainly in consumer and what's being produced in content. And then we went right to an operator, someone who's in the streets operating a company with this environment going to 2021. We're going to stay with that theme for our next two and last two speakers, and concentrate on what's happening in media companies, not only here, but all over the world. And the next speaker is Anne-Marie Wills. She is the founder and CEO of Leverage Labs here in the US. And I've known Anne-Marie for a long time. We worked together in 3 different companies. When I go to a new company, she would come, which I thought was great because she's so talented. And she founded this company based on their consultancy to media companies around first-party data. And the way they position their company is really neat. She'll get into the importance of first-party data and and cookies going away. But what they say basically is they go into media companies and they put a face to the data. So it's no longer just a number or a name. They tell you a heck of a lot more about that person based on first-party data and social media. So with that, we'd like to welcome Anne-Marie.
And it's a really big question. So in regard to first party data, there are a number, almost like a perfect storm of market conditions that's happening right now that makes first party data almost an imperative for a media company. We've got privacy and compliance. That's a global issue. We have needs that consumers have for deeper personalization of their user experience. Organizations like media companies traditionally have challenges around data being siloed across an organization, and the technological issues that come along with that. We've got moves being made by big tech, Google deprecating third-party cookies. That's happening. It's imminent. We've already gotten a stay of execution on that, and it's happening at the end of 2021. Apple has made some recent changes and made some moves in terms of their intelligent tracking, which essentially is going to impact things like Facebook and virtually make retargeting disappear. So these are some major things that are happening across the entire scope of our world. And the old tools of using third-party data are disappearing because of what's happening, and that deeply impacts both brands and media companies. So I guess for media companies and for brands, really the playbook is to start collecting your own addressable first-party data. Because when you do that, when you have people opting into your media brands, opting into your consumer brands, then you have a relationship, you have an exchange of value that's taking place. And a lot of the privacy and compliance issues that are coming up are because we've fundamentally, as an industry, sort of played fast and loose with with that value exchange. When people opt into our brands, we don't necessarily always offer back the amount of value that they expect, but use them more as an asset. So privacy, basically the way to get over the privacy hurdle is to create deep relationships with your users, respect them and respect their privacy, provide them information regularly about how they can opt out or change their preferences, and obviously abide by the rules and the laws that are in place currently about how we provide back any personal data. In my way of thinking, there's obviously the commercial side of why first-party data is so meaningful for media companies, but there's also sort of the user experience and the user requirements and the user expectations that are at play as well. We have a number of clients, media and publishing companies, B2B and B2C, large and small, and we are a first-party data consultancy. So fundamentally, we're working with our media partners to create a first-party data strategy. Much of that strategy relies on the effective use of technology to help them aggregate and compile all of the first-party data that they have at their disposal. A typical media company, you're going to have email platforms, your websites, maybe print fulfillment data that sits in an offsite fulfillment system. You may have a variety of other enhancement data sets, third-party data sets that explain who the individuals in your ecosystem are. But very often they sit in siloed buckets across your organization. So we specialize in using a specific type of technology called a customer data platform. That enables all of that data to be resolved and identities to be built in a singular sort of profile of individuals across your entire ecosystem. So where you had all of this knowledge and deep, rich behavioral information and intelligence living in buckets across the organization, we now have them singularly compiled into this new veneer of technology. So what I see in my practice is that smart media companies who really see the future in terms of providing deeper intelligence to their marketing and advertising partners, deeper, richer ways to connect with their user bases, and maybe even looking outside of just leveraging their audience data to do better, to provide better intelligence and access in their own ecosystem, but even outside of their own inventory, decoupling inventory from their audience asset. Folks that have that vision are making investments in the technology and the capabilities to bring that first-party data together. They're also, deeply interested and compelled to make sure that they are creating very personalized experiences for their consumers, paying close attention to their privacy and compliance needs and the requirements of the law. So that's what we're seeing. That's a great question, John. So many people have heard, here recently that Apple has made some changes to the way that its technology functions in terms of tracking cookies. And essentially that's going to shake the foundation of Facebook. There's full page ads going in many major newspapers to talk about this issue. What it really means is that the anonymous retargeting of individuals from Facebook is going to disappear. And it is a huge tactic that many media companies use to offer things like audience extension. But the real important thing to know here is that if you have your own first-party data, you can offer the same product, the same capability to your advertising clients. It's called CRM retargeting. It's basically using first-party data, loading that into the walled garden platforms, and then applying sponsored campaigns against that. So nothing really is lost if you have first-party data. If you don't, that whole product line could, evaporate for you.
Thank you, Anne-Marie. It's interesting there. That's a huge warning in terms of media companies having to move to all first-party data. And there was a study that came out at least here in the U.S., and I think it was sometime in the last 30 or 60 days, that almost 70% or some 75% of media companies do not have a strategy in place as of this date to make the January 2022 deadline. And that's getting kind of late in the game. So, that's why we want to focus on that, as well as the other theme being the concentration on the user and the reader. And, and that was pretty much what Samir was talking about as well, with the absence of advertising going down, and companies not exhibiting because there were no shows. Everyone's kind of moved to the left or right and said, okay, we need to concentrate on the user, the people, our customers now are the readers, and that's a common theme going into this year. The belief is, and at least it's my belief, that will then be supplemented with advertising coming back and exhibiting companies coming back, and the pie at that point should be larger than it was going in, because we were all faced to do launch other product lines. So with that, speaking of products, what we'd like to do is have our final speaker. Eric Kemzelt also is someone I've worked with in a couple of different companies, and he's most previously, he was the CTO of Endeavor Business Media, and he then spun out from that company to a new company called Parameter One with his team, and their customers are us, media companies. And what they do is help in digital strategy, launching digital products, and Eric is right on the ground with media companies here in the US, mainly on what they're doing and what the new products are. So with that, we'd love to turn it over to Eric.
Initially, John, our customers are coming to us, they're seeking to invest in scalable platforms. And we're seeing a lot of investment now as customers are looking to bring data-driven intelligence and digital product offerings to their advertisers. And they're looking to grow and scale, which is, I think, a very good sign for 2021. Publishers are asking for a more integrated approach than we've had in the past, and we've seen in the past, that not only improves engagement with their audience, but also proves that engagement to their advertisers. One of the things they're also being asked to do is to go much further than they have in the past with marketing solutions to help the advertisers with their marketing programs, with lead generation, lead nurturing, and sponsored campaigns. To accomplish this, our customers are seeking ways to bridge disparate data systems, or systems that were previously separate systems. Editorial systems, editorial content, CMSs, advertiser profiles, related media to advertisers such as press releases, white papers, related video media, things that the advertiser may have in even disparate sources. And couple that with audience identification and, of course, the behavioral data that brings all of those information sources together around the content that the audience is consuming. All of these key systems, they are looking to bring together to help achieve the data-driven approach that is required. Maybe a recent example of some work that we're doing with several of our customers is a set of intelligence reports that Parameter One offers as part of the platform offering. One such report that's seen a lot of interest, it demonstrates on a per advertiser view specific engagements across print, online, and e-marketing channels. The report shows content performance across all of those channels, audience profiles, and reach, as well as specific leads that were generated within that time frame for that advertiser. And those reports are then being used to help instruct the publisher and the advertiser where to best apply efforts to reach goals. So in short, I think the overarching thing that we're seeing with our customers is how do we be much smarter about how we leverage our data? How do we bring those data systems together to best inform how we go to market, how we reach the advertisers, and how we best prove that performance to our advertisers?
That's interesting, Eric, because one of the things that we've heard in previous speakers is two things, really. One, stay the course. So that to us is kind of stay the course, but get deeper into that integration and bringing different systems together, only pushing it to its farther boundaries. And the other is maybe with a lack of trade shows, content is more important than ever. And that sounds like a very simple thing to say, but it seems the whole concentric world in media today is based on the content. Is that what you're seeing with new products as far as digital?
Yeah, absolutely. I think content is king. You know, we've heard that before, but it's more true and relevant than ever. Context is also still, you know, so important, more important than ever, to be able to bring not just the advertisers' content and their engagement with the audience, but also the advertisers' content, the advertisers' message and their story, and how they can best bring their story to that audience. So good companies are looking at virtual events perhaps differently than they have in the past. Virtual events have kind of commanded that we look at pacing of the content a little differently than we have in the past. If you look at a live event, people are pacing that content and that audience engagement around travel schedules, around hotel visits, around that, you know, cramming that into that one weekend. Whereas virtual events, the pacing is a little different. The pacing can be, you know, on a regular basis, on a quarterly basis, a weekly basis, a monthly basis. So I think the smart companies that are truly embracing the virtual environment are those that are understanding that that pacing needs to change. And they're looking to engage with that audience and bring that advertiser message on a more regular basis, a more periodic basis.
Thank you, Eric. Thank you to all our guest speakers. The problem with being a film director is you have to leave some things on the cutting room floor. And all of our interviewees had additional things to say, which we will release over the next couple of weeks. I do want to mention that we would have included Mark Holbrath and Tony Silber on their study, Media Companies Are Innovating and Adapting in Times of Pandemic. It's a great study of the top 25 B2B companies. James will be posting it. As you know, I'm an advertising specialist, a revenue specialist. Don't know much about anything else. But in terms of what I heard, in my experience in doing this for many, many years, when one door closes, another opens. Reed said that advertising-related businesses didn't sell for as much. But he did say something else. And he did say that different buyers have appeared in terms of people that are buying media properties. The same thing has happened in advertising. We have a number of new categories that have emerged from COVID. My sales company actually last year had a decent year. Samir and Eric talked about content and audience becoming more important than advertising. I got to tell you, I really welcome that. That's the way it used to be, where great content generated audience, which generated advertising. Tom spoke about magazines being a smaller part of his portfolio, thus obviously the advertising revenue being smaller. However, it's still important. It still exists. Anne-Marie spoke about developing third-party restrictions. A door is closing, I guess, but another one is opening, is really with first-party data. Eric said the same thing. John and I have formed a partnership called j.elliott to help media companies strategically. Now, with that said, obviously, please call us if we can help, but I'd like to turn it over to John. John? John, you have to unmute.
Thank you, Jim. That's why we're a partnership. I know I want to thank everyone for attending, and I know we want to turn it over to quick questions pretty quickly, James. Is that correct? Or
yeah, definitely. So I don't know whether you want to make any last remarks, John, before we take some questions?
Yeah, that's a dangerous thing to ask me to do, but I'll make it very quick. as far as management's concerned, and I do spend a lot of time in the C-suite, both living there before and advising in C-suite now, I can tell you the biggest thing the most important thing, and it's been true of management anytime, is to be very consistent in the messages to employees throughout this whole time, whether it be last year or going into this year. And you know what? As tough as it is, it's okay to be a little bit upbeat. And as Tom said, probably the best example of the operator running a company today, there's some light out there, and there will be an end, and it's different from last spring. No matter how bad it is today, we're heading in the right direction. So I'm pretty excited. There's going to be some difficult days ahead, but I'm still overall very excited. And even what we talked about today when it came to content, first-party data, all these things that are changing and evolving. So with that, thanks for the opportunity. And I guess we'll take some questions if we can.
Yeah, fantastic.
And I want to add that Dr. Husney is also available to answer questions too.
I'm actually gonna promote Dr. Husney to panelist if he doesn't mind. So Samir, if you're listening, I'm gonna invite you to be a panelist now. I don't know whether this works. It may spit you off and put you back on. There we go. He's there. He needs to unmute himself. We'll wait for. There we go. Samir is there. Hello, Samir. Thank you so much for joining. Great to see you.
You're more than welcome. Thanks for the invite.
Now we have a great video there and a great set of answers from you about your interviews with CEOs. We have a question here from Edward Baniak, who's asking whether the statistics and the kind of trends that you mentioned about about subscriptions and the revenue coming from subscriptions, whether you see that happening across both consumer and B2B. Do you have a view on that?
Well, I mean, definitely it's among consumer, which is the field that I actually follow and I keep track of. In most cases, the B2B, the subscription have been always like free. I mean, there were controlled circulation, and so people are not paying anything for those magazines. But with the consumer magazines, almost without exception, with every, I spoke with 7, 8 CEOs and presidents of magazine groups, which technically the largest magazine media groups in the country. And with no exceptions, they have seen a big lift in their subscriptions for the magazines. I mean, and for people ordering the print product, mainly through either direct mail or through the digital subscriptions and the digital venues that are out there.
Yeah, maybe you can take first go at the other question we have here, and then Jim and John, I'll come to you as well. Samir, you track every year launches of new magazines. I know that 2020 we had, was it 60 new magazines launched in the US, which was down a bit, but still an incredible number. Have you noticed, this is John Day's question, have you noticed whether the threshold for entering a market with a new magazine brand has lowered for the media companies that you work with because of the working from home and the Zoom legacy? Is it a bit easier to get started now, paradoxically, because we're all working from home?
Well, I mean, definitely technology had made it so easy to enter into the market, and combined with that, the digital printing processes have made it easy to launch a magazine with a very limited circulation. I mean, I remember the days where if somebody wanted to launch a magazine and go to a printer and say, like, I want like 10,000 copies, they used to throw him out of the place because, oh, it takes us like 10,000 copies to fix the colors and to make sure everything is. But now, I mean, I'm receiving magazines that have 500 copies, limited edition of 500 copies. But then you look at the cover price, it is $30 as opposed for one issue, as opposed to $1.99. So technology definitely has made it much easier, and the barriers to entry have disappeared. And the main reason we've seen this decline, which is almost half of the number of magazines that were started in 2019, is because most of the new magazines depend on single copy sales. And when you have the market shut down, when you have all the bookstores, whether Barnes & Noble or Books A Million, or shut down, there's no outlet for distribution for those magazines. And because I would say 95% of all new magazines survive on single copy sales in their first year or two before they convert to a subscription-driven magazine. So while the barriers of entry are gone, but when you have a pandemic and when you have the retail stores all shut down, you can create the best magazines you want, but then you will have the audience of one, which is you. because you can't distribute it any other place.
Yeah, absolutely. Fantastic. Thank you very much, Dr. Husney. That's fantastic. I've got a couple of other questions. So, Jim, I'm going to ask you to answer something else in a minute, if I may, because I want to make sure we cover all of them. We've got a question from Jessica Perry, and we've also got one from John Wilpers, both on similar subjects around NorthStar's presentation. Jessica's asking, what is NorthStar forecasting for the return of business travel over the next couple of years as a percentage of pre-COVID? And John Wilpers is asking where that 25% that Tom mentioned of the budget that they've already done, where's that coming from? Is it ads, sponsorship? What's working in terms of revenue? So, John, you interviewed Tom, did you? Do you want to take that one?
Yeah, as far as the forecast for the rebound in travel, I don't think anybody knows right now, and I'm not speaking from Tom. He lives in that industry, but I'll tell you what. As a follow-up, we'll do is I'll ask Tom that question, and we'll get the answer, because I think it's a great question. As far as what's making up that, in my discussion of the 25%. By the way, people running businesses today, we kind of knew when Tom said he had 25% of his business pre-booked as of the beginning of January. We knew that was going to get noticed, because that's a big deal. And I think, just in discussing with Tom, I think the majority of that is a combination of virtual events and then specialized virtual events and special things that they've just been launching lately. Because there's always kind of a hoopla of enthusiasm when something new is launched. So I think that would be the blend. I don't think they have a smaller print component, so I don't think the print is probably, or it could be. But there again, that's my feeling on it. But we'll ask him.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll do the same, John Wilpers, we'll do the same with your question to Anne-Marie about first-party data and using that in editorial departments. We don't quite have time to get to that one today, but we'll do that question as well and come back to you. And then one last question here live from Jason Goldberg, who's asking, for companies like Tom's, and maybe this is a broader question for the industry, how do they see the forecasting of live to virtual events in the post-vaccinated healthy world, whenever that comes? We hope it will be soon. So what do you think that split's going to look like? I mean, that's something of interest to us as well as a trade association relying on events. Jim, do you want to give us your take on that, and maybe we'll ask John and Samir as well what they think.
I don't have any crystal ball, but I'm assuming that it's going to be a process between live and virtual events, some kind of mix. All of the speakers and all the people that I've been talking to have been talking about that in various different compositions. John?
Well, I think what's going to happen is there's virtual events today. The in-person events come back. But I think the hybrid model is here to stay. So, and that's not a bad thing, because, one of the things that drove me crazy when I was operating trade shows is we'd have this big euphoric activity for 5 or 6 days, and then nothing would happen for another year. And then we got smart and put out newsletters and things like that. But I think the hybrid model and the educational model with live events will actually be more robust than they were before. It's interesting, this week here in the US, in Las Vegas, was the Consumer Electronics Show. That's 170,000 attendees who are not going somewhere. And it's devastating Vegas. The reason I bring that up is I think the bigger events are going to get slower to get bigger again. But I think when people, this is only my personal feeling, I think when people, whenever this is, feel safe, that it's okay to do this, I think they're going to plow back into those events. There are other people saying, no, they'll never be that big again because of what's happened. It's going to take some time, but I think there is this pent-up desire to get back in person to those events. When that happens, I'm not sure, but when it happens, then we'll know this is over.
Yeah, I mean, I know for sure it's going to happen, and we'll go back to face-to-face events for two main reasons. One, people are so sick and tired and have screen fatigue that, I mean, it's like at the end of the day, you are just like looking at yourself. And two, the human nature, we forget. I mean, our institutional memory is so short. I mean, it's exactly like when companies say, oh, we are going to be consumer driven. We are going to focus on the consumer because the ad revenue is down. The minute the economy picks up and ad is coming back, we go back to the old model and we go back to like advertising driven. So our human nature, in part, I mean, we want to forget. And the minute we're back on the planes, the minute we are flying, I mean, we are going to get together. I mean, we are, saying cheers and enjoying this company with each other via this screen. It's like I tell my students all the time. I mean, if you are happy with a virtual boyfriend or girlfriend, trust me, it's not the same when you see the real thing or when you have the real thing. Same thing with the event.
I think that's a fantastic way to end the session.
Yes.
Thank you very much, Jim and John and Samir. And of course, thank you also to our other contributors there, Tom and Anne-Marie and Reed Phillips, for your fantastic contributions to today. Just a reminder that the session has been recorded. Oh, and Eric as well, of course. Thank you very much, Eric, for your video as well. The session has been recorded. It will appear on our YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/FIPPWorld. You'll be able to watch that on there very soon. Do also subscribe to the newsletter. The link is there in the chat if you haven't already done so. Please do follow us on Twitter @FIPPWorld and @FIPPCEO. Do go and have a look as well at the website for our hosts today, Jim and John. We'll put that into the video link. And of course, go and look at Samir's website, Mr. Magazine. If you Google Mr. Magazine, it's the only thing that comes up because that's how well known he is. And you can go and get some great insight in there as well. The next session, the next FIPP webinar will be in 2 weeks' time. We're starting to take 2-week breaks now between webinars to give you all a chance to recover. The next one will be on e-commerce. We'll be talking once again to our friends at Tipsa. Fantastic new e-commerce technology that are giving us another example of success from their portfolio. That will be on the 28th of January. So we look forward to seeing you then. In the meantime, for those of you who've joined us today, thank you very much for joining us live. I hope you enjoyed the session and we will see you again soon. Thank you and goodbye.